All right. Really excited to have Matt join us on the next episode of the Profits Podcast. Just as a high level, again, on this podcast, we really try to learn, be curious, and learn as much as we can where DDC brands gain insights of how to run their business better operations, and hopefully more profitable. And I think, as anyone that's been in this space long enough, we're now as an industry looking to be cash flow efficient, operationally efficient, and profitable. So, Matt, super excited to have you on the podcast. I know you're a big supply chain enthusiast like myself, but maybe you could start off, give us a little bit about yourself, what you do, so we could dive in from there.
Yeah, sure. A little bit about myself is a bit of a different question than what I do, but we'll start with a little bit about myself. Was born and raised in Canada, so I am Canadian. And as I was sharing with you, Izzy, a few moments ago, decided to join this experiment called America officially earlier last year, so became a citizen as well. And most of my career has been in e-commerce and operations. I actually started my career in finance. I did a couple of years, but got bored of it because, well, it's finance. And back in 2009, I joined what became the first startup I was a part of, Rent the Runway, which has become a really large business. And followed that by joining another startup called Birchbox in the subscription commerce space. Joined a logistics startup in San Francisco called Ship. And then about 7 years ago, I started consulting and advising brands in a similar capacity as I was helping them kind of in-house when I was, full-time employed, formalize the business into what is today known as Second Marathon, which initially started off as more of like a fractional operations a consultancy where we would come in, help brands in a very intensive manner, helping them with everything from soup to nuts, shipping or negotiating their shipping rates, helping them refine their in-house fulfillment or outsourcing to a new fulfillment partner, a 3PL, helping them with manufacturing production. So really a little bit of everything. And then when COVID came around a few years ago, we decided to really focus on the number one service or request that brands are most commonly seeking our support with, which was helping them find their first or next 3PL or fulfillment provider. So, yeah, really over the last few years, Izzy, we've been almost wholly focused, almost exclusively focused on this one and only thing or engagement of essentially playing that like matchmaker role, helping brands find the right partner for them. And then very quickly, about 2.5 months ago, we actually launched a new business, much of which the impetus was a lot of the findings and learnings through Second Marathon, our consulting business. But yeah, we launched a new business called Third Person. So if you go to thirdperson.co, you can see the new product, the experience, but it's essentially a productized version of this consulting service that we've been offering brands for many years. Helping brands, emerging high growth e-commerce brands discover and find the right fulfillment provider for them. So yeah, Izzy, that's a little bit about myself and what I've been up to the last few years.
I love it. There's so much to unpack. I can't wait. So first of all, I'm fascinated you came from finance and then you went into operations. I'm curious, do you find that like with the numbers background, the finance background, was that a key part of your success in operations and running things efficiently?
Yeah, I think the transition, for lack of a better word, or the migration from finance to operations is not as peculiar as it might sound or seem, for a number of reasons. One of which is exactly what you said. So they're both very quantitative. They both leverage a lot of math and analysis and numbers and profit. P&L. Being skilled at Excel certainly doesn't hurt. It helps very much so. So yeah, for me it was a very at the time it was a very obvious transition. Somewhat ironically, when I joined, as I said earlier, when I joined Rent the Runway, 2 weeks into that business, I think I was their fifth employee. I actually joined in more of a finance manner.
Hmm.
So they actually hired me to kind of help sit with their buyer at their time, their merchandiser, and kind of help him think through how much of what we need to purchase. And my first reaction was like, well, I'm not a fashionista. How the heck do I know how many of this red shoulder, this red dress should I purchase, or this blue low cut dress I should purchase? Um, I spent the first couple months of the business really bringing in my skills for creating PowerPoint presentations and Excel, workbooks. And then very quickly we discovered that the operation actually had a huge gap. There really wasn't sufficient bandwidth to scale the operation. And at the time I couldn't really spell operation. I mean, it was a new world for me. Like I didn't study operations in school. It wasn't my background, but being fungible has always been a skill of mine, and discovered ways to make it work.
I love that. I know on our end, when we work with tons of brands, and we find consistent pattern on the most successful brands, at least we have seen. There's this really fine balance between great brand, great product, beautiful product. It's got to be amazing. And running things efficiently, and devils in the details. For you to be profitable, the dimes and pennies makes add up. So if you're running any part of your operation inefficiently, in the early days, it may be a less of an impact. But as you're scaling, those things can either make you or break you. So I'm curious, in the early days of either Rent the Runway or Birchbox, how did you guys look at 3PLs? And I'm assuming like that background was part of the inspiration for your business today. But I'd love to hear, like, those are big companies, and it sounds like you're involved on those sides of operations and logistics. So how did you guys make those decisions early days of this 3PL versus that 3PL? What was your approach back then?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I'll kind of answer it two ways, because actually Birchbox and Rent the Runway were really quite different in how they approached fulfillment. Starting with Rent the Runway, and I'll kind of preface by saying that I believe it's similar today, and I've been gone for about 14 years now. But certainly back then, and I believe for their entire 15-year journey now, they've decided or determined that fulfillment or logistics is actually a core competency of that
Hmm.
business.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they do the fulfillment themselves. They do not outsource, or certainly at the time, but again, I believe it's still true. They do not outsource the kind of pick and pack, the processing, the fulfillment component of their logistics. I mean, they use carriers to deliver. They don't have their own fleet, but we being Rent the Runway, or now I guess they have always determined that fulfillment really is a core competency. And I think that's really a key point where I'm of the belief that a business should be famous for something. When I think of certainly successful businesses in America, or probably globally, but certainly in this country, in the Americas, successful businesses are those that, when a user thinks about them, there's something immediate that comes to mind, right? Like, let's just take Amazon, for example. I mean, there's probably a few things that we can think that they're famous for, right? Like product selection, speed of logistics, price. Some might say ripping off sellers. But there's a few things in there, right? Ease of checkout. And with Rent the Runway, if you think about it, I mean, those who are familiar, with that business, it's essentially a very large dry cleaning operation, where like the speed at which they can fulfill orders, get those orders back, send them through dry cleaning, which those familiar with that process, it's not a quick process to dry clean. So given that the dry cleaning component was a competitive advantage for the business early on, we actually co-located our fulfillment inside of dry cleaners. In the earliest days, we were at a dry cleaners in the West Village in New York. So we had like a little nook. Orders would come back, returns would come back. We'd send them right to the dry cleaners, which was literally, I'd have to turn my head and I see the operation. And again, fast forward 15 years with all the scale that they've had. I mean, they're now a public company. They've presumably continued to believe that outsourcing to a 3PL is just not it's just not viable, for their business.
But that's based on the fact that their business is so unique. Like how many
Correct.
businesses need that? So that's
Correct.
actually that's no longer commodity to their core competency. It's no, it's actually part of their product.
It
So
is. It is. It is fundamental.
ah,
Exactly, exactly. Which is different, briefly, different than you look at the Birchbox model, which I'd say is more akin to, what I consider to be a typical e-commerce brand. Although, Birchbox definitely had some, a lot of nuance and uniqueness, but, in that model, they didn't have that kind of daily, just in time need to like receive an input, i.e., address, and ship it back out immediately. With Birchbox, they had the ability, we had the ability to like receive in product, inventory it, store it, and then pull the product at the cadence that we needed it. So it's more similar to like a candle of the month club, a hot sauce company, an apparel brand where yes, we had to be good at fulfillment and logistics. Otherwise, customers would get upset, just like any business, right? Like, you're not going to stay in business too long if your customers are constantly complaining about, poor logistics and slow processing times. But for us, we were more focused on, scaling. And given how quickly Birchbox grew in our first few years, growing from literally zero to 1 million orders a month in the first 4 years, we had to find partners whose specialty, whose core competency was labor management, and being able to, staff accordingly to keep up with the significant scale that we were seeing.
that's fascinating. So on the Birchbox side, where it almost feels like, and I'm curious of how you apply this to your customers today. When you started out, because you were there early, right? I think you said there was a few hundred orders a day or 300 orders a month when you started. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I think we're doing, yeah. I joined the second month of operations as their first full-time employee.
So you really went from as a baby of a company to doing 1 million orders a month. That journey is wild. So
Yeah.
how do you, as a company, you could argue there's like there may be 3PLs that focus on certain size companies. Obviously, there's niches of, if it's apparel, etc. So how did you guys as Birchbox like, all right, we're a baby of a company. What's the right 3PL for us? How do you look at it then? And I guess how did that inform the way you operate today for your customers, advising correctly, simply based on the scale of the business?
Yeah. Matt, 10 or 12 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, when we made this decision, younger Matt, if I knew back then what I know today about how to find the right 3PL, I suspect we would have. I mean, we may have landed on the same 3PL, but we certainly would have. I think my decision factors were different than how they've gone refined in the last dozen years. And that's not to say again that the 3PL that we used was a bad 3PL, not at all. But the market has also evolved. And what I think is really important for brands when they're discovering the right fulfillment provider for them, the right 3PL, is we think of it very much so like dating, or dating with the hopes of marriage, right? Between two people, where like the 3PL market here in the United States alone is highly fragmented, right? There are literally 10,000 3PLs just here in the US, right? So like for most brands who are not experts at knowing the market and understanding the market, most brand owners have probably never met a 3PL. They don't know what a 3PL is before they start looking for what they determine is a 3PL, a fulfillment provider. And I think too many brands search or discover 3PLs in the wrong way, not asking the right questions, right? It's sort of akin, to using that dating analogy. Like imagine if I walked into a bar on a Friday night and said, who's single and who's female, and some nice young lady stands up and she says, I'm single and female, and I go, well, let's get married, right? Because you met that criteria, right? Like I think we all would agree that those are probably not the right questions to filter in and of themselves to determine who's the right partner for you, right? You want to get to know this person, you want to ask them certain values, you want to, I mean, there's, everyone's a little bit different. And I think that's the key, where every brand has different needs, not just that they're operational profile looks different from an order perspective, SKU perspective, sales channels, but culturally, what matters to you as a brand? What are your, how do you communicate? What does account management mean to you? There's so much there that based on your response and your feelings, can determine who is the right 3PL partner for you. Searching for best fulfillment company in Chicago or best fulfillment company in Dallas is insufficient
Right.
in truly discovering the right partner for you.
Yeah, like it shouldn't be an SEO game of who, if you Google and who comes up first. There's so many details to that. And I guess that's something like a matchmaker where you guys do on your side, either through the marketplace model, third person, or the other model. You really got to match it correctly. An incorrect match, it's not just like a software you plug in, plug out. You actually, if you move to them, to your point, you're kind of getting married.
Yeah.
And hopefully you don't want to end in divorce. You want to make sure that you can be successful as much as possible through the growth of your company.
Exactly. Switching costs are high. It's destabilizing. It's risky. It gives a lot of headache. And, you want to, this isn't like determining which calendar scheduling software do I use? Do I use something with HubSpot, or do I use Calendly or Google Calendar, right? Switching between those is much easier than switching between fulfillment providers.
Awesome. So let's just say someone would go to third person, your website, and because that model is self-service, right? You have a model where you kind of facilitate as a matchmaker, and a model where people could self-service themselves, and it's free, which is amazing. What were some of the, let's call the top 3 things any brand should look for as they're filtering all the different options? You mentioned one thing around either it's capacity, account management. I don't know if that's it, but what are, let's say, the top 3 things a brand should be looking at as they start matching themselves, if they're looking themselves for 3PL?
Yeah. So when a brand is signing up on third person specifically, we ask them, I believe it's about 25 questions, a couple dozen questions, so that we really start to understand what matters to them, right? It's more than just how many SKUs you have, how many orders a month do you do, and do you sell on Shopify, right? Like those are all important questions, but there's so much more to it, as I just explained a moment ago. So we ask, a couple dozen questions. It takes about 7 or 10 minutes for a brand to kind of sign up. Again, it's all free. It doesn't cost them a penny. We don't get your credit card, none of that. And then what our algorithm does is basically score that specific brand's profile against all the 3PLs who are enrolled in our platform. And it basically spits out like a quantitative, an actual score, like 97%, 93%, 87%, based on the algorithm that we've built, which is essentially a rule engine of about 30 rules that we think are important in creating a good potential for a match. It doesn't guarantee that the relationship's going to be perfect, because just like marriage, 2 people have to work at it and get to know each other, but we really are trying to stack the deck in your favor. So once you find the matches, your top 5 matches, you then have the option to connect with them directly. So we believe that it's really important for a brand and a 3PL to work directly, right? We don't like middlemen, middle people, middle software managing that relationship. Fulfillment is the business of exceptions management. And when what hits the fan,
Yep,
it's really important for the brand to work directly with the 3PL doing the work. So we think of third person as sort of like a way to accelerate the dating period. So, whereas to your point earlier, brands might rely on SEO results to discover the right 3PL. We want to avoid those pitfalls and really get the brand and 3PL on the 4th or 5th date. So you already know a bunch about the 3PL because we provided that information. The 3PL is actually provided with information of the brand when they connect with you. So you're going into like that 3rd, 4th, or 5th date with a set of information, but now the onus is on the 2 of you to like talk and meet and get to know each other. So, very tactically, to answer your question, I think a few things that are important besides having that kind of high level or top level match is ability to scale, right? Maybe I want to start in a facility on the East Coast, but then I want to, move into a West Coast facility or expand overseas. As the financial markets are doing their thing over the last few years, a question that's becoming increasingly important to brands that we support is the financial health of my 3PL, right? There's been a few recent closures and bankruptcies in the market. I mean, that just always happens. I mean, that's capitalism, right? In a large market, there's going to be some that don't make it, or that don't survive. So understanding the financial health and the solvency of your 3PL partner, the person that you're marrying, is really, really important. So culturally, these are some of the factors that we see are increasingly important to brands to really validate who it is that they're signing up with.
Love that. And I guess a quick follow up to that. I'm curious in your perspective of, because you mentioned working directly with your 3PL is essential, and I agree. Like 3PLs, logistics partners, one of the most important partners, probably second or first or second most important partner to the brand. What are your thoughts on 4PL versus 3PL? Do you would a good 4PL provider will be equally successful as a 3PL provider? And just for everyone to know the difference, either the 3PL, the company working with actually operates their own facility versus a 4PL model where they leverage other 3PLs and they more on the software side. And there's probably hybrids in between. What's your thoughts on that model?
Yeah, Izzy, I hate to stereotype, but those who know me know that I'm not very good at sugarcoating. I don't like to name names, but I also don't like to sugarcoat.
Yep.
But generally, I mean, I have been very bearish, very kind of negative on the 4PL market as a whole. I have a free newsletter I send out every week or two, and I kind of have a pretty strong track record of sharing my concern around the 4PL model. And I think the key point as to why is what I mentioned a moment ago, which is this need for these two partners, the brand and the 3PL, to work directly together. And while I think there's a lot of value in the 4PL model generally, it sounds good, on paper. I think there's long-term hope, but the models that we've seen in the market create too much distraction, and it sort of always creates this idea of like too many cooks in the kitchen. Right? There's a lot of finger pointing, there's a lot of blame, broken telephone, and I think fundamentally, you as the brand really want to work directly with the person or the group that's doing the work. And I think another thing I've struggled with is there tends to be a point where the brand is large enough where they have like the bargaining power, the purchasing power, the ability to work directly with the 3PL. So we've, in our consulting business, Second Marathon, we've worked with a handful of brands that we're working with, 4PLs. And they also got to know the actual 3PL who was doing the work. So they kind of came to us and they said, well, why the heck do we need to use this like middle layer that's really not adding a whole lot of value to us when we can work directly with the source, right? It's like no one likes using StubHub and all these middlemen to like purchase tickets, right? Like you wish you can go directly to the venue to purchase, because where there's a middleman, there's a markup and just fat, which is not good. So yeah, and I wish I could say that I endorse 4PLs. I have friends who run 4PLs. I have relationships with many of them, but I've just been very underwhelmed by the models that we've seen in the market today.
I can't agree more. Like for us on our end at Portless, account management is everything from like regular meetings, depending how big you are, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, to like Slack channels. And we were a 4PL, and again, I won't name names, came to us to potentially leverage us as like one of their logistics. And I said, how are we going to speak to the customers? Like speaking to customers is everything in this business. Like, oh, we have a middle call center that deals with that. I'm like, that's me broken telephone. We're not going to solve problems. Like when things happen in the middle of the night, we're solving problems. But we can't do that. There's a call center. It's not under our umbrella. So I actually 1,000% agree. I think what these 4PLs are great marketing agencies. They build great software with great marketing. But I can't say it's the best for the operations of the business. So I think we're super aligned on that. I know we're running tight in time. I'll just one more question, and I'd love to get your perspective. on, which is you mentioned really for scaling of an operation, and that's something we got really good at, is really the ability to scale staff. You really have to have like a really strategic staffing scale up for your business. But that being said, how do you see that evolving with AI, robots, Optimus slash Chat GPT, 4.0? How do you see that playing into the 3PL world?
Yeah, Izzy, I wish I was an expert on AI and machine learning and robotics. I'm not. I mean, I know a little bit. I think on the fulfillment side of the house, I would envision robotics to be more influential or impactful to the day to day than say AI, right? Because fundamentally, I mean, better than most. Um, you know, uh, running a 3PL is really, you are in the business of labor management, right? I mean, certainly you have other costs there. You have a lot of technology in your buildings. There's account managers, there's salespeople. There are physical buildings where you have a lease or you own it. Maybe you have a mortgage on it. But your biggest cost is labor. It's managing labor, and I'm not too convinced that AI can really go at this early stage can be as impactful to the day-to-day economics of your business than say robotics and different forms of automation, right? Amazon has really kind of made robotics famous in fulfillment over the last decade. Although you walk into some of their warehouses and they do public tours from time to time, and there's still a lot of people walking around and like doing things and picking things. So robotics are expensive. The break even tends to be really high for innovative technology and hardware. But I'm certainly not. I'm not. If I was a 3PL, I would not be concerned that the AI mob is coming and I'm going to be out of business or they're going to do anything destructive there. But I certainly think that as brands become more sophisticated and as brands, as your customers, as a 3PL's customer starts to leverage different tools to scale their business and to capture new business, I think it's important for 3PLs just even culturally to be aware of what's going on and to be amenable and receptive to embracing new technologies in the market.
Love it. All right, we'll just finish off with a final question, not connected to logistics or 3PL. If you go back in time and give your younger self some either business advice, entrepreneurship advice, what would it be?
Yeah, kind of. There's probably a lot. It's a great question. I think I sort of touched on this earlier, and I've been aware of this throughout my career, but in the heat of the moment, it's difficult to kind of take a pause and really think about it. But what I referenced earlier about kind of being famous for something. I applied that on the business level, but I think the same is true for individuals. My belief is that specialists rock, right? Like being a jack of all trades, that's good, that's important. But I struggle to believe that you can kind of run your full career successfully being kind of a jack of all trades. You can be good at a lot, but I think you really need to have one or two or a small handful of skills that you're really, really good at. So when I think of Izzy, there's something, there's one or two or a few things that like immediately come to mind of like why you are the best at that. And I would hope that people think similarly for me. So, it might sort of narrow your, TAM, so to speak, your sort of total addressable market in terms of new business opportunities. But in life and in business, generally there's enough demand to go around for even the most like esoteric skill set that if you become the best at it, if you become known for it, if your name or your business sort of becomes like a verb for what it is that you are solving, I firmly believe that there will be enough business there, and you will have a flourishing business as a result.
I love it. As we wrap up, I think what you do to help brands connect with the right 3PL, either through third person on the self-service side or through the matchmaker side, is amazing. Where could brands find you? How could they get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, I tend to be pretty active on Twitter, which is typically a little bit more personal than business, but certainly on LinkedIn you can find me. If you just search my name, Matthew Hertz, I think it's if you do like LinkedIn.com/Hertz, my last name, you should be able to find me. And then you can email me, Matt MATT at thirdperson, THIRD, the number thirdperson.co. And go on our websites, thirdperson.co or secondmarathon.com, and explore. If you hit contact, it probably goes to me. And we'd love to connect and talk with anyone about, the 3PL and fulfillment market.
Love it. Matt, thank you so much again for being here. That was a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.